So one of my favorite things that we get to do all year long is go on this summer discipleship trip where we take like 30 to 50 folks with disabilities and a bunch of volunteers, and usually we'll go to some theme park or some resort. We have a ton of fun, and then we also gather together and invest in our friends with disabilities and just spend time in community learning about Jesus. And it's awesome. I mean, it's one of the best weeks of the year for me. And right now we would be very close to going on it except for the pandemic. So one of the this is not a favorite story, but this is a story that will get us into what we're going to talk about. So we do, in the mornings, we'll just do like a continental breakfast, and that helps us to keep the cost of the trip down, and it's easier on the volunteers that are preparing the meals and things like that. And so about the second or third day of that trip, and any kind of a trip like that, with any group of adults or youth, the people that are running that trip get tired. And so I'm in maximum tired mode, and I'm not really by nature a morning person, and it's in the morning, and I'm helping somebody to get ready, and my phone, which would be constantly ringing, rings. And so I answer that, and it's one of my friends with disabilities who is on the trip, and I say, hello, yes, what can I do for you? And hey, what's going on? What are we doing for breakfast this morning? And I'm like, well, we'll just be doing the continental breakfast like we've been doing every morning. So I think that's almost going on right now. So I'll probably see you down in the room where we're having breakfast. And he says, oh, so there's no pancakes? There's no sausage? And so I hung up on him. I didn't respond. I was frustrated, and so I was just like, this conversation is over. And so I hang up. Why did I tell you guys that story? That doesn't particularly paint me in a great light in terms of being a disability ministry person. I don't know that that's particularly a quality that I want you to emulate as you become the disability ministry people in your churches or communities or whatever. So I think that I want to lift up that story for two things that I think are important. One is that as you become the disability ministry people, you might think, oh, I've got to be the most patient person. I've got to be supernaturally wonderful, just like Zach Grant. That's not true. I lose my patience. I have bad days and good days. You do have to be patient in ministry, I think. You do have to be kind and follow after the example of Jesus to do Christian ministry. But I don't think that it's more so for ministry to folks with disabilities. Secondly, I want to ward you guys against romanticizing people with disabilities. Now, this story about this guy giving me a hard time about breakfast and getting me frustrated with him, that's, very like just a minor annoyance that I had in the moment when my patience was thin. But in my history of ministry, all of the things that I hear in other circles about youth ministry or ministry to adults of any sort, I think that we've experienced those things in ministry with folks with disabilities. People with disabilities often get romanticized, and so they're described as being angelic or, kind of can do no wrong, however you want to cut it. And people with disabilities will get into all of the things that you can imagine people getting into, because people with disabilities are very much first people, and so that comes with all the territory. So as you're out there doing the work of disability ministry, and you're building friendships with people with disabilities, and You're meeting so many folks, and you're thinking, oh gosh, these guys need to be a part of our church, to be a part of our community. I think it's natural that some common themes might arise from that community that you're going to want to talk about, and you're going to want to share that with your congregation and say, boy, look at these things that could be a part of who we are as a church or who we are in our community. I think, though, as that happens, the danger also arises that we would start to romanticize or speak monolithically about people with disabilities, speak about people with disabilities as though they are all the same. How do you avoid that danger, though, as you're doing? If this were a better video, or if I were better at my job, I would have really clear rules or methods set out in order to avoid that, or the thing that which you would not want to do. I don't necessarily have that. What I have is raising the danger that these, as you're doing one thing, the other thing can arise. Also, I think if I had one piece of advice, which I think applies to folks with disabilities, but is maybe just generally helpful in ministry, is to not wave people like a flag. I think that the things that have helped me the most in combating that, and I'm sure that there have been times when that I've been made aware of this by doing the wrong things, but I think if we, instead of waving people with disabilities like a flag, showing them off, if instead we're able to just speak about people with disabilities in specific and not talk about them generally, but talk about that guy that you know, and talk about the gifts that they bring to the church. Each one of us, and Scripture assures us this is true of people with disabilities, and it assures us that this is true of you as well. Each one has gifts that the church needs, that we're less without. And so if we lift up those gifts, if we lift up the things that that person with disabilities brings, or that maybe even we might be talking about a group in particular, or stories that are coming out of a particular experience, I think that that is a good way to avoid generalizing people with disabilities, romanticizing them. People with disabilities don't have to be perfect to benefit our communities. They're not perfect, and neither are we. And so I think that we'll all fit together well under God's grace. And so go forth, lift up your friends with disabilities, lift up their gifts, but lift them up specifically, and avoid romanticizing them or speaking about them as though they're all the same. Thanks.